What's up, studio? It's David back with another camera video. Today I want to talk about two primary things, and that's camera sensors and lenses. And I know that that's kind of a dense topic, but we're gonna make it fun, I promise. And it's actually pretty important to understand this big guy, the Fuji GFX 100 Mark II, or GFX 100 the second, as they like to call it. All right, so just as a quick overview, this is a 102 megapixel medium format camera from Fujifilm. It's got Fuji's new X Processor 5, which gives it faster data readout and processing. There's a new sensor with improved dynamic range and corner sensitivity. It's got improved video features like 4K 60, 8K 30, 422 10-bit, ProRes video track autofocus, and probably my new favorite feature, this new film simulation, Fuji Reala 100, which we'll get to later. And you know, any of these individual features normally wouldn't be that impressive. 8K video is not really new at this point. Stuff like 4K 60 has been around for a good while. 10-bit 422 ProRes video is happening in a lot of cameras right now. 8 stops of stabilization is actually pretty good. Now, it's not any of these individual things that makes this camera impressive. It's the fact that it does all of these things on a medium format sensor. And if you don't know what that means, it unlocks a lot of possibilities. So let's break it down. All right, so when you're choosing a camera, one of the main factors that you have to take into account is the camera sensor and the sensor size. That's this part of the camera. Basically, it's the part that takes in the photons, converts them into an electrical signal, and then demosaics them to actually create an image. If you want a bigger breakdown on that, I actually did one in my Leica M11 video, so go check that out if you haven't already. In the world of digital cameras, you've got a few different sensor sizes, and they're all pretty much standardized, right? You've got 1.0 type sensors, which were in a lot of point and shoot cameras and now in some smartphones. You've got micro four thirds, which is kind of going out of style at this point. You've got APS-C, which is actually in most of the cameras that Fuji makes that aren't medium format. Then you've got full frame, which is kind of the standard big sensor that most companies like Canon and Nikon and Sony will use in their semi-professional cameras. And then you've got medium format. And medium format is generally used in billboards. Basically, think photographers that are making a ton of money from campaigns and those kind of projects. The reason medium format cameras are generally quite a bit more expensive than other cameras isn't just the fact that you're making a physically bigger sensor, which does cost more money. It's the fact that you gotta cool that sensor, which costs more money. If you wanna do stabilization on that sensor, that's a lot harder and more expensive to do. You've gotta have lenses that can project a bigger image circle. You have to have a processor that can push all that data through the camera. I mean, you're just in general building a lot more camera around that sensor. When you've got a bigger sensor to record that light onto, you can do one of two major things. You can either keep the same resolution, but have way bigger photosensitive pixels to absorb that light into, which has a brighter image with less noise, or you can up the resolution and have the same amount of light intake. And that gives you the ability to have a finer sfumato, that granular tonality between color to color that kind of makes the image feel more real and have more depth. It's usually pretty easy to distinguish images that were shot on a medium format camera versus something like a 1.0 type sensor, because it really gives you that medium format look. That's also the reason that I usually shoot so much medium and large format film. It just gives you so much more granular tonality that really gives the image a lot of depth. And the other thing that a medium format sensor can do for you is open up a huge range of formats to shoot basically whatever you need. If you start this big, you can always just crop down into whatever format you're looking for. So this is the second version of the GFX 100, and at this point, Fuji really wants the GFX 100 series to be kind of like a budget IMAX camera of sorts. I mean, look at all the formats that this thing covers. It's kind of like a Swiss Army knife of video formats. You can do something like Super 35 all the way up to VistaVision. But the one lens format that I actually find really interesting that this camera can cover is PL mount anamorphic with an adapter, but it can also de-squeeze the images internally. And I know that's a lot of words, that's a lot of mumbo jumbo, but let's get into that real quick. So back in the 1950s, film stocks were mostly standardized to a 4:3 aspect ratio. This worked for a while, but after TV started getting more popular, people didn't really have a reason to go to the theater anymore. And that was kind of a big problem, so a lot of the studios had an idea. What if they could print the image on the same film stock, but somehow get a wider aspect ratio? Most lenses are what you would call spherical lenses, and that just basically means that the glass inside of the lens is circular and projects the light pretty normally. But anamorphic lenses have an extra cylindrical block inside of them that squeezes the light into that lens and projects that onto a piece of film. Then, these movies could be shot on these lenses and then de-squeezed through a reverse anamorphic lens to get this extra special wide aspect ratio that you're actually probably familiar with in most movies. Probably the most obvious difference with anamorphic lenses that you've probably seen before is they have this really distinct flare when they are pointed at these bright specular light sources. You've definitely seen these overused in J.J. Abrams movies and probably used pretty well in a lot of other movies. At this point, it's just kind of a stylistic choice. Another characteristic of anamorphic lenses are these elongated bokeh balls, because the aperture is more like a cat eye to account for the squeezing of the light, so you end up with these really elongated bokeh balls in the out of focus areas. And because all that light is getting squeezed into the aperture, the center of the image is usually pretty sharp, but the sides of the image kind of get rounded and you get this nice dreamy fall off. It's definitely a very stylistic choice. You wouldn't want to use it in every single shot, but it is pretty good at conveying specific emotions. And the last major difference between an anamorphic lens and a spherical lens is something called focus breathing. It kind of squeezes and de-squeezes the image vertically in the background, which I think looks really cool. So this camera doesn't just accept anamorphic PL mount lenses with an adapter, you can actually get a live preview of the image getting de-squeezed when you're using an anamorphic lens on this camera. Normally you'd need a separate monitor to do that, like on the top of the camera, and that just adds a lot of bulk. So it's really cool that you have all of that just built into the camera itself. So I know I just talked a lot about video, but these are also photo cameras, so you probably want to hear about that too, and overall, I love it. Image quality on this camera is just insane. I mean, the medium format look really comes through, and 100 megapixels is pretty much more than you would ever want. But that said, I mean, I kind of do wish that Fuji would eventually add a bind sensor like we had with the Leica M11. That let you do 60 megapixels, 36 megapixels, or 18 megapixels for better low light performance. And I don't always want 100 megapixels, right? Sometimes I would prefer to have 50, but have better low light. So maybe in the future. Just like all the other Fujifilm cameras, you've got a ton of film simulations on here. This one has all the film simulations that we've seen before, but they also added this new one called Reala Ace. And I really like this film stock. It might be one of my favorite new film simulations that they've added to the camera. It just has this really natural look that doesn't have a lot of weird greens in the shadows, and the skin tones and color to me are just some of the best that they've made so far. Pretty much all of Fujifilm's cameras give you this extremely tactile experience. There's always a lot of dials and buttons that map to the exposure triangle so you can actually see the difference as you're touching them. And this camera in particular has all of these function buttons that you can just map to whatever you want to really make it super versatile. They've also got this cool e-ink display at the top that can show things like your settings, your battery life. They've got these digital dials, which look really cool. And it now has waveforms, so you can actually see if you're peaking or if the shadows are too low or something like that. I've used pretty much all of Fuji's GFX cameras before, and overall I think this one has like the best design out of any of them. Although like, Fuji, if you're hearing this, please bring back the GFX 50R body style, because I really want a digital medium format rangefinder camera. Please. But this is supposed to be like a hybrid video stills camera, right? So it should be able to handle pretty much any scenario. So I'm gonna bring it out to Cupertino and shoot the Apple event with it. We might do a couple of thumbnails, we might do some B-roll with it. Just gonna see how it fares in that kind of like fast-paced scenario. And ironically, the iPhone 15 gets announced the exact same day that this camera gets announced. So won't be breaking any embargoes there. So let's see how this fares and come back.
It's so wonderful to be here with you at the Steve Jobs Theater.
So all right, this camera is going to retail for about $7,500 US for the body, which is definitely pretty expensive, but it's actually one of the most affordable medium format cameras on the market, especially considering it's like one of the most adaptable photo video hybrid cameras on the market that uses a medium format sensor. The Hasselblad HDD 100C is about $8,200 for the body, and it doesn't even shoot video. And the only other like major digital medium format camera maker on the market right now is Phase One, and their cameras are so expensive that if you have to ask, you probably can't afford it. But they do use a much larger medium format sensor, so you do kind of have to take that into account. Fuji's first GFX 100 that we've got right here was originally $10,000. So honestly, this is a pretty good price point. It's pretty amazing that Fuji was able to get the GFX 100 Mark II down to that price point. Fuji's definitely trying to market this as a super high-end photo video hybrid device that can really shoot full-on cinema, like movie quality footage. So honestly, I feel like that's a pretty good price. Anyways, guys, let me know if you have any other questions on this thing. I'm gonna leave a Google Drive link in the description below with some of the photo samples that I took, so you can really pixel peep those 100 megapixel files if you want to. Until next time, I'll catch y'all in the next video. See ya.